it's Pandora here, and I'm coming to you today with a tag video that was started by a lovely YouTuber by the name of Alice in Tarotland. And so this is the Witches Down South tag. Yay! So I usually don't like to do tags because I'm really bad at them. I tend to skip questions and stuff like that. So I tend to avoid them, but in this case I'm actually really excited about it because it's a tag specifically for witches in the Southern Hemisphere, and anything that helps raise awareness of or contribute towards building community among witches in the Southern Hemisphere, I am all for, I'm all about that. So I'm actually really excited about doing this one, and I'm going to try and film it in one take. So if I say or or any of those sorts of things, that's just part of my pattern of normal speech, so I'm sorry about that. I know from an audience engagement perspective it's better if you do edit your videos, but I'm having trouble with my editing app being temperamental at the moment, so I think I'm going to be better off if I just film this and upload it just in one file, just in case I do have trouble and it gets too long. So yeah, and I would love to see any and everyone in the Southern Hemisphere do this tag. I'll tag a couple of people in particular because Alice already tagged most of the Aussie YouTubers that I know of, but there's a few that she didn't name, like Karyn from the Lost Sumerian, and Nina from Shuffle Tarot, Rachel the Love Witch, and a couple of our adopted Aussie YouTubers like Allorah, who lives in Perth at the moment, and Shannon, who is a Canadian born beauty, and she lives around the Brisbane area, I believe. So I would love to see those guys do this tag as well. And yeah, I'm just gonna have a go. I've got all my questions written down here, and I've got my trusty pen to cross them out as I do them so I don't stuff it up, hopefully. And I've written some little notes so that I can hopefully stay succinct as well. So if you are in the Southern Hemisphere and you want to do this tag, just do it. And if you, like, maybe you don't have a channel yet and you've never uploaded a video in your life and you would still like to do this tag, then please do it. I would love to see everyone, and I hope that this takes off, and I hope that Aussie YouTubers in particular take off, because we've got a lot to offer and there's a lot of us, and I really love the Aussie YouTube community. It's really community based and everyone is friends with everyone else that I know of. Like, I haven't known of anyone to have any conflict or anything like that, so it's really great. And yeah, I will get started with the questions. So the first question is, where are you based? I am based in central Queensland in a town called Gladstone. I've been here for about 12 years now. I think I moved here at the beginning of 2006 and it's now 2019 at the time of recording this video. So I've been here for a while. I met my husband and had children and really haven't looked back. So I used to work in community pharmacy, and there's things that I like about living in Gladstone and things that I don't like. There are a lot of industrial jobs and projects going on in Gladstone on and off, and I don't really like living in an industrial town when I don't actually work in the industry. I find that I dislike that a little bit. And we've got some beautiful nature spots, so I really love some of the nature spots that we have here, but community is a little bit tricky. Like, I have friends who are witches and pagans, but at the moment I don't actually have community. Like, a long time ago, I want to say when my son was little, I was doing my Reiki certificates, and I was also doing my tarot certification through a lady named Pascal who lived in the Baffle Creek area. And now that she's moved, that community sort of broke up, and like there was some weird stuff going on because she had some conflict with one of her old students, and so people like moved away from the group. And there was also a really nice lady by the name of Gaia, she went by the name Gaia, who was very, like, she was a spiritual teacher. She did crystal healing courses and stuff like that, and she was really strong on building community. She started the Gladstone Spiritual Network Facebook page, and she was right onto it with building community, and she's just a really lovely person, and she sadly passed away from cancer some years ago. So since then, like, things with the community have been quite quiet, and like, I do know people and there are events on that I could go to and stuff, but I find it's hard to get in on some situations. Like some people are friends with each other and then it's hard to get in on that situation. So they've got a little bit of a closed circle. But yeah, I would love to find some in-person friends. So if you are in the Gladstone region and you want to hang out with me, then, you know, send me a message. I would love to just hang out and have a cup of tea and coffee or coffee and like just chat, and maybe, just maybe, I'll find someone one day that actually wants to play with me and do some rituals and some workings. That would be great. So the second question is, do you identify as a witch or by another name? I do identify as a witch, and when I was 13, I started identifying as a witch. So I was quite young and I was really enthusiastic about getting into learning about the craft. And then when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I kind of didn't identify as a witch anymore for a while. I guess other people's ideas about and opinions about what a real witch is kind of got into my head, and I let that influence me, and I kind of thought to myself, well, am I really a witch? Maybe I'm not. And then I sort of just let it go and surrendered it for a time, and I didn't put that pressure on myself, which I think was a good thing, and that was what I needed at the time. However, in recent years, I started to come back to a very strong resonance with the word witch, and I realized that it's about what I think a witch is and not about what somebody else thinks a witch is. So, and you know, people try to gatekeep from time to time. You'll notice people trying to gatekeep and say, well, this is what a real witch is and this is not. But ultimately, it's all just gatekeeping. Nobody really owns the word witch. So if you want to call yourself a witch, then really you can. You don't necessarily have to jump through someone else's hoops or meet their requirements or their definitions to call yourself a witch. Ultimately, that may not be a popular opinion, but that's what I think. And so to me, being a witch is about taking responsibility for my life and kind of deconstructing that conditioning and knowing what I want to get out of life and then taking action towards that. Doesn't mean that my life is perfect, no. Doesn't mean that everything works out the way that I want it to all the time, no, of course not. It just means that it's that title that I honor myself with, to say that I'm sovereign and I'm in control of my own life, at least to the extent that I actually am, because, you know, nobody is completely in control of their own life and everything that goes on in the world. So if there was, then I would just change a lot of things. That tomorrow there would be no more climate change, like heaps of things would change. But what is within my power to change, I take those, like the steps towards making those changes to the best of my ability and what's within my power. So it's really about personal empowerment. I know that's cliche as fuck, but it is. So anyway, moving on. What's your belief, worldview, or current paradigm? This is a very interesting question. I'm just gonna have a sip of water. So I don't have a particular belief system. I'm not Wiccan, so I don't necessarily follow the Wiccan read and that kind of thing, but I do think that Wiccan beliefs are interesting. And ultimately, I don't believe in having beliefs, so I'll explain what I mean by that. If you look at the definition of the word belief, inherent in the word belief is doubt, and so to believe something is to accept it as truth without evidence or proof that it's actually true. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, to be believing something that may or may not be true. And so I would ultimately advocate for everybody to look at what is true and to look at reality. And sometimes I use belief as a tool, like that kind of chaos magic idea of belief as a tool. So, you know, some things like whether or not there's a God, whether or not magic works, things like that, right? I don't necessarily believe in them, but I act as though I do believe in them. And sometimes when you act like you believe in something, interesting things can happen. And so that's the kind of framework that I believe in. And as for my worldview or current paradigm, my worldview is quite simply that there's room in the world for everyone's views. And when it comes to religion and stuff like that, and even politics, I'm really confused by it all, to be honest, in the sense that, you know, people have different beliefs and then they can't accept other people having different beliefs, and that confuses me. It's like, you say tomato, I say tomato, like, why can't we just all get along, kind of thing. Like, and you know, with politics, if you don't like gay marriage, then don't marry a gay person, basically, like, is my worldview. So, you know, and the whole thing with Christians calling God God, and New Age people calling it the universe, or witches calling it the divine or spirit, like, it's all just different words for the same thing, and it confuses me that people get so hung up and so pedantic on their worldview and want to try and push it on other people, or get offended by people using their word for something. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's like people having different languages, you know. It doesn't mean that they're saying the wrong thing, it just means that they're saying it in their way. So that's my worldview in a nutshell. And so my framework, current paradigm, it says current paradigm. So my paradigm that I've been working within recently is folk magic. So I'm not, like, I used to be very neo-pagan in my approach, and just that very Wiccan influenced, or Wiccan-esque, if you will, kind of thing. But I've moved away from that somewhat, and what I do now is more folk magic. So it's just, you know, very eclectic, very anything goes kind of thing, just doing what feels right for me and following my intuition. And there's things that I'm playing around with and things that I'm trying. I'm in a very experimental phase in my journey and on my path. So, you know, I'm trying out a lot of different things, and I do still go back to some of that neo-pagan stuff, but I've also gone way back to my upbringing as a Christian and looking at some of that stuff as well. And that is a topic for a whole other video, so I'll get to that another day. But at the moment, the paradigm that I'm working within is just folk magic, and that's what I call it. So yes, what are your current go-to tools? So my current go-to tools would be tarot and runes. I love pulling a card. I do that most days, or a rune stone or two. And my other favorite tools at the moment are incense and botanicals. So since I've been a brand rep with Juniper Apothecary, I've been getting a lot of new botanicals in, and I love to use those in my practice. And I'm playing around with, the different tools and different energies from those different botanicals. And I love making up my own incense blends, and I'll get to that when I get to one of the other questions, but I use those almost daily. So I also really love crystals and stones. I make my own tools, but I haven't been reaching for some of my favorite ones and stuff as much lately, but I have been making them. If you watched my last room tour videos, then you would have seen my art desk where I have my crystal wands that I make, and I like glue the crystals together and then use a sculpting clay to make a wand. And I love to use those, but I haven't really been reaching for them, even though I have been making them. I consider my art supplies to be a magical tool, and I use those a lot lately. And I also love to use my journal. So I love journaling, especially gratitude journaling. It makes me feel really happy. So do you cast a circle? If so, what do you associate with the different directions? Yeah. So the answer to that question is, I have done in the past. I used to cast circle a lot, but when I think about it, I haven't done it very much recently. And what I do is I actually will set up altar spaces in different directions and different parts of my house that represent different things. And so I have sacred space already set up, so that when it's time to get to work, I just get straight to work. And sometimes I'll call in the elements just in a very general way, and I won't necessarily move to face those different directions that it represents to me, but I'll just, say I welcome in air and talk about what associations air has for me and things like that. And, the sylphs or the fairies or the air spirits and stuff like that. So I'll just do it in a very casual, very kind of low-key kind of way, instead of doing the whole thing where I do the full circle where I've got the water and the salt and I'm using my athame and all of that stuff. I actually haven't done that for quite a while. So having said that, I do have altars set up where different tools representing the different elements are placed in different directions. So to me, east represents air, because simply that's where the sun rises. So it represents those new fresh energies that I associate with the element of air. And I have earth in the south because in the Southern Hemisphere, the north is where the equator is. So that's the direction of light and fire. So I associate the north with fire and the south with earth, because we've got, you know, the South Pole towards the south that we're closer to. And then I would obviously put water in the west, because that's where the sun sets. And to me, that represents a lot of things to do with water. And, you know, we've got a lot of water through the south as well. Like we've got rivers and streams and stuff like that. So I don't necessarily think that there's any right or wrong. Again, going back to that whole thing about your worldview, if you think that different directions are better and that works better for you, then by all means that's where you should associate them, and where you should invoke them when you are casting a circle, if you do cast circle. So to me, like, it's not really a strict hard and fast, this is the way it must be kind of thing. It's just whatever works for you and whatever feels right for you. So what's the next question? Do you work with the seasons or the wheel of the year? I do somewhat when I'm feeling in the mood to. And what that means is that I do change up my altars for the season. Changing up my altars is a very big part of my practice these days, and it's also a way of expressing my creativity, as well as making a visual reminder of my path for myself. And, you know, I'll use different colors and different symbols and different items that represent different things for the season on my altars, and I'll work with my altars seasonally in that way. As for actually doing a ritual for the particular Sabbath, sometimes I'll do it if I'm feeling it, and sometimes not. Like if I'm not feeling it, then I'm not going to tie myself in knots, because I don't feel like doing something for, say, the spring equinox. Like I usually do like to do something for the equinoxes, because they're really significant to me, and I think that they're really powerful times of the year. And I love the energies that are around at those times. But getting off track, what I'm trying to say is that I do flip the wheel. So when the Northern Hemisphere is having Samhain, I'll have Beltane. When they're having Lunasa, I'll have Imbolc, and so on and so forth. And that just makes sense to me, but I don't stick to it hard and fast, because the seasons, you know, obviously the seasons that we have in the Southern Hemisphere are not the same as in the Northern Hemisphere. Like we do have a distinct winter and summer, but then there's other seasons in there, like there's wet season, there's dry season, and you know, times of the year when different animals and plants are in season, like when they're breeding and flowering and seeding and all that sort of stuff, and when we're having the bushfires season and stuff like that. So it's not the same as that Celtic wheel of the year that the neo-pagan Wiccanesque kind of wheel of the year is based on. So it's tricky, but I do somewhat work with the seasons, and sometimes I'll switch up my decks seasonally as well. But as I've said on this channel before, sometimes I reach for like wintry decks during the summer and stuff like that, so I don't do the seasonal deck thing very much. So yes, I do work with the seasons and the wheel of the year somewhat, and I do flip the wheel, but it doesn't always work. And so if I'm not feeling it, then I just won't necessarily do anything, like as in a particular celebration or ritual. It doesn't help that I don't really have anyone to do celebrations and rituals with, but yes, so there's question 6. And question 7 is, do you have a consistent daily or regular practice? So what I do daily is I do meditate daily, and that is non-negotiable. I always meditate every day, always for at least 5 minutes. preferably longer. I do like to go for at least 10 to 15 minutes every day. I often will pull a card or a runestone every day. I'd like to spend time at my altars every day and just tending to them and making sure my offerings are all fresh and everything like that. That's something that I do daily. There's other things that I do more regularly, like I don't always do a fully blown ritual with the whole, like I said, circle casting and having all the things there and having specific words that I'm going to say and stuff, but I do regularly like burn incense when I'm cleansing. So when I clean my house and I do my floors, I use Florida water in my floor wash, and then I'll usually burn incense or sage or something like that to clear the energy as well. And I do pray quite regularly to, you know, spirit or deity or the divine as I perceive it. And so yeah, I do have a pretty consistent regular practice. It could be more regular, like I'd be happier if I had time to do a little bit more, or the motivation, you know, to do a little bit more. Being solitary is sometimes hard. It sometimes makes it hard to get motivated, but yeah, I do have a regular practice, but it's not always super structured or formalized, and I would like for it to be a little bit more structured. So question 8, are there challenges or blocks you find specific to witching in the Southern Hemisphere? I don't think there are any blocks. I think if you want to practice witchcraft, then you can just go ahead and do it. Like we live in the 21st century. There's the internet where you can get a lot of information, and you know, you can buy just about anything off eBay or off the internet and get it sent to you. So there's not really any blocks to practicing, I don't think. There are challenges specific to witching in the Southern Hemisphere. And one of those things is the relative geographical isolation that we have here. We're on a relatively large landmass in the Australasian continent, and we have a relatively small population. So we're very spread out, and I find that there's a lot of people that I've met online or that I've met fleetingly and who've now moved away who I really resonate with, but they live like a 5 or 10 or 12 hour drive away from me, so it's not feasible. And I know of at least 3 people that if we met in person, like it would be on. We would be witching up a storm together, we would be doing rituals and workings, and it'd be so much fun. But because they live so far away from me, like I've got a friend who lives on the New South Wales Victorian border, and then my other friends are like in New South Wales or Victoria. And there's people, you know, in Perth who I connect with, and, you know, even Avalon, like she used to live in Queensland, but she lived in Cairns, which is like a 12-hour drive from here as well, or actually probably even more. It's probably more like a 17-hour drive. So, and, you know, I met up with her. I don't like to talk about this as though I'm bragging about it, but one day I went to Cairns and we met up and we had coffee together and went for a witchy shopping date together, and it was fantastic. I had such a great time. I would love to have somebody to do that with more regularly, and I definitely would love to have people to hang out with and do rituals with. Like I have friends, but a lot of my friends are like the really practical types, and they don't want to hang out and do rituals together. Like I've got a friend who lives literally down the road from me, and she gives me really good gardening tips, and she's one of those really level-headed people, so she's really good for giving advice on life stuff. But she doesn't want to do spells and rituals together. Like, no, she'll make art with me, like that's pretty cool. But another friend of mine lives in Bundaberg, and she says doing rituals is a bit quirky and kooky and it's not for her. And I'm like, I want to be quirky and kooky. Let's just get together and pretend that we're Stevie Nicks. Like, let's pretend we're in Charmed. Come on, let's be quirky and kooky. But she doesn't want to. So that's one challenge to living in the Southern Hemisphere. It is a bit of a challenge that there's a lot of resources that are based on the Northern Hemisphere that are really readily available, and the Southern Hemisphere resources can be a bit harder to come by or to find good ones. So that's a bit of a challenge as well. And I guess just that awareness, like a lot of people in the Northern Hemisphere, because they have the highest population, of humans, they tend to forget about us in the Southern Hemisphere, and sometimes they'll just gloss over the fact that we're doing a completely different thing and that our weather is completely different and everything like that. And that's a little bit annoying, but I guess it's not a major challenge. But yeah, the biggest one I can think of is probably the geographical isolation, and the fact that, like, I wish I lived in a really big metropolitan area. Like, a lot of people in Melbourne seem to have no trouble finding friends and stuff like that. I would love to live somewhere like that. But there's a lot of rural and remote areas in Australia, and it can be hard for people who resonate with each other to meet up. So that's definitely probably the biggest challenge. So question 9 is, are there any Southern Hemisphere resources, books, blogs, YouTubers, etc. you would recommend? So I would recommend watching everybody from the Southern Hemisphere on YouTube that you possibly can. So just for that community connection and engagement, like, purpose. So just watch everybody. Watch every person that you can watch possibly from the Southern Hemisphere on YouTube. Like, just watch everybody. I recommend everybody. So there's a few people who are really popular on YouTube with good reason. Like, I think Alvine at the time of making this video has got around 20k subscribers, and Avalon just hit 14k, which is fantastic. Katie Flowers has got around 11k. So, you know, there's a lot of people whose channels are really popular with good reason, but they're also really down to earth, and they're very community focused. Like, especially Avalon, she loves community, so she started the Australian Witchcraft Facebook page, and that's what I love about the Aussie YouTube community. Like, everybody is just so nice and down to earth and wants to promote community, and I just love that. But you should watch everybody. And as for blogs, there's a couple of podcasts I would recommend. I can't really think of any blogs off the top of my head, apart from mine, which, you know, my YouTube channel is better than my blog. I haven't updated my blog in ages, but you should listen to Rune Soup by Gordon White. That's a fantastic podcast by a Southern Hemisphere content creator. And there's also Belle from Belladonna and Bones, who has a couple of podcasts. Pardon me. So she's got the Everyday Witch podcast that she's created, and she hasn't uploaded to that for a while. And then she's also got the Garden of Ink and Bones podcast, which she did with her friend Rue, and again, she hasn't uploaded to it for a while. And I think she's actually on hiatus from her business as well, because of something she's got going on in her 9-to-5 job. But I would definitely recommend checking those out if you haven't already. As for books, I would recommend, I've got my big pile here. So I would definitely recommend anything by Ly DeAngelis. She's fantastic. I would recommend anything by G'day Palmer. So I've got his books here. This is by Land, Sky and Sea, and I've just been told this is actually out of print, unfortunately, but you should be able to get it secondhand still. And then there's Ecstatic Witchcraft, which I love as well. And these are really good resources. These are those kind of, two of those kind of, I need to go back and reread kind of books, because they've got a lot of really great exercises in them. Some of them I still use to this day. Like, I'll do a tree breathing exercise every once in a while. Like, I'll pretend that I'm a tree and just imagine that you're drawing up energy from the earth and all of that kind of thing, like that shamanic tree breathing. I love that. And then there's also his book that he did with Jane Meredith. He's done Elements of Magic as well. This is Magic of the Iron Pentacle, and that is a fantastic book. I've got other books by Jane Meredith as well. This is Journey to the Dark Goddess. This has been really helpful for me on my path. And then I've also got Rituals of Celebration. This is one of the books that I bought when I was shopping with Avalon and Cairns. So I think I just got it from a Angus and Robertson or something like that, but it's really good. So it's about the Sabbats written from a Southern Hemisphere perspective. Then there's White Magic by Lucy Cavendish. This one, when I first bought it, I thought it was going to be really cringy. I kind of cringed at the fact that it's called White Magic, like that whole white magic, black magic dichotomy just makes me cringe. But having said that, over the years, this has stood the test of time as a resource that I turn to again and again, especially if a certain celebration is coming up that I want to celebrate or do a ritual for. I will often turn to this book, and there's just a lot of really great stuff in it. Like, look at how yellow the pages are. I've had it for ages, and at first I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get much out of this book, but I get heaps out of it, and I really will never get rid of this book. It's been such a great resource. Another really good resource, I don't know if this is in print anymore, but this is Practicing the Witch's Craft, Real Magic Under a Southern Sky, edited by Douglas Ezzy. So this is one of those kind of anthology type books, and I've come to really enjoy these types of books that are written, like there's different chapters written by different authors and things like that. And this one is really good. I love it. It's one of those I have to go back and read again books as well, because it's been a long time, but I haven't wanted to part with it. It's been a staple on my shelf. And then there is Rebecca Campbell's books. She's probably more of a new age resource, so you may or may not be into that kind of thing, but I find her books really good. She is Australian, even though when you hear her talk, she's got one of those weird like accents that people get when they've been overseas for too long, but she is actually an Australian author, and this is a Hay House publication, and I really enjoy it. I think like maybe it doesn't go as deeply as it could into things like you know, menstruation and stuff like that that's relevant to women, but I do still think it's a really good book. And she's also got Light is the New Black, and she's done some oracle card decks now as well. And another book resource I want to recommend, like I would recommend a lot of different titles by Rockpool Publishing. They've done a lot of good books. And this is You Are Clairvoyant by Belinda Grace, and she's just a really lovely Australian lady, and this is quite a nice book on developing your intuition and that kind of thing. So I would recommend that if you're interested. And I would recommend a lot of Fiona Horn books, not every single one of them. Some of them are a bit cringy. But like, you know, the Love Spells book that she wrote and stuff like that. But like her first couple of books were really good and really good introductions to the craft. They were the first books that I ever read on the craft. And she's done some decent stuff through Rockpool Publishing in recent years as well. I had her autobiography, but I've lent it to a friend, and I'll be getting her new book soon as well. So yes. That is everything. I'm pretty sure I did all of the questions and didn't forget anything. So yay, I finished a tag video. So I hope that you have enjoyed this. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere and you want to do this tag, by all means, please do. And I will see you next time on my channel. Bye!